So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. Today's webinar is part of a series called Meet a STEM Superhero. My name is Jessica Bettis, and today I will be moderating our webinar today. I work at the University of Illinois as an Education and Inclusivity Director. And then also I want to introduce my colleague, Angela Wong, who works at Stanford University as Director of Education and Outreach. So together we've been hosting this webinar series and really excited about the feedback we've been getting. It's a really great opportunity for students like yourself or educators to be able to directly interact with scientists and engineers and ask your burning questions, and then also kind of get to the more personal side to learn more about what their individual STEM journey was like and what they do on a daily basis. So you'll get that opportunity today. But before we get started, I do want to share out that link to our event webpage. So can we share that out?
I actually don't think we can, but we will send a follow-up email. But let me actually, I
Okay.
think I can do it because I'm the main co-host or the main
Okay,
host.
perfect.
The STEM Superheroes website.
Oh, I think I just sent it.
Oh, you were okay.
Okay.
Got it.
Yeah. So
Perfect.
if you're interested in learning more about our past events or upcoming events, that is a great website to check out. And Angela will post any other information to the chat window if we find it along the way. So this webinar will be recorded. So if there's anything you want to go back into, you can also look at that website. So for today's webinar, we'll begin with each of our STEM superheroes giving a brief introduction on their journey, and then we have a couple of prepared questions for our speakers, but at any point, feel free to use the Q&A feature to enter whatever questions or comments you might have, and we'll go ahead and relay that to our speakers to make sure your questions get answered. All right. So with that, I'm going to start off by introducing Dr. Karen Dowling, our first speaker for today. Karen was born in Seattle and grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. She studied electrical engineering at Caltech in Pasadena, California, and continued with her graduate studies in a master's degree and a PhD. At Stanford University. She is now a postdoc researcher at Livermore National Laboratory. Her research interests are in creating electronics that survive in extreme environments, like in space or really hot or cold places, for power devices and for green energy. So with that, thanks so much for joining us today, Karen. I will go ahead and share your slides.
Great.
And feel free to let me know when you want to advance.
Sure. Hi. So thank you for the introduction, Jessica. So my name's Karen, and I'll try to give you guys a brief overview of my journey into the world of engineering and science. All right, next slide, I guess. Yeah. So here's like a brief summary of how my involvement in science kind of grew over time. So I was born in 91, and then I went to a small private school from kindergarten to 8th grade. The school is so small that there were only 20 people or so in my class. And of those 20, only about 5 of us were taking like the advanced math class. And of those people, I was the only girl. So it was a very interesting start to, I guess, my education. Was kind of always being like the kid who worked the hardest, but didn't really have a good peer group necessarily. So middle school was definitely a challenging time for me. But later, I got to go to a large public high school, so in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and it was a very different environment. There were lots of different students very interested in math and science, so I had like a stronger friend group through that time, and that really probably helped me pursue continuing to learn more about math and science. And I even joined the science fair at some point and went to an engineering camp at the University of Notre Dame. And that really started to spark my curiosity for engineering in particular, and helped me figure out what kind of engineering I wanted to do. And from there, I applied to a lot of schools for college, and managed to squeeze into Caltech, and so I ended up going out to California and have been out here ever since. And there I studied electrical engineering, and I did an internship while I was out there at a small aerospace company called Crane, where I learned a bit about how simulations work and signal processing and controls. And then I also took a few summer research opportunities to do research in science labs. So I actually went home to the University of Michigan a couple times. So I got to stay with my family, but also get to work at a great university and do some science experiments with graduate students. And that experience was really rewarding for me, and it made me want to pursue even more education and stay in school even longer. So I ended up applying to Stanford for graduate school and ended up getting both my master's and my PhD while I was there, and really deep diving into a specific field of electrical engineering known as microelectronics there. And while I was at Stanford, I also had a chance to do a few other internships. I found that a great way to get to travel is to do internships or apply to conferences while in grad school, because other people will pay your ticket. You get to go see cool things and learn new stuff. So I went to a government lab, MIT Lincoln Laboratory, and did a summer internship there. And then a few years later, I actually got to go to Germany for a few months and worked at this company called Infineon. They make computer chips, mostly for sensors and power electronics. I think their most famous chip is in the new Google Pixel phone. It has hand waving gestures, and Infineon actually made the chip that can track the hand waves that you can use to control the phone. Anyway, I'm probably taking too long. And now I work at Livermore National Laboratory, which is another government lab in California, closer to my current family. Next slide. Okay, I'll try to speed this up. It's very easy to talk about my life story for a long time.
Oh, no, you're fine. These are all the awesome details we want to hear.
Oh, okay, great.
No worries.
Great.
You're good.
Okay, so that was kind of my school journey, but my personality probably drove a bit of that, and there was a lot going on behind the scenes. So a big part of my childhood and growing up is that I was one of 7 children. So I was the second oldest and had 6 siblings. So that really shaped like my childhood. I always had friends to play with at home. And since I was on the older side, I was kind of first a caregiver, then a mentor. And so that was a big part, I think, of my journey. Early on, I actually wanted to be a doctor because I really liked the idea of helping people. And it seemed like being a doctor was a great way to do that, a medical doctor. But then one day I was taking care of my youngest brother, and he got a bloody nose, and it made me really queasy and I realized at that moment that I couldn't be a doctor. So I was like, well, what else can I do to help people? And I learned that engineering is a really powerful way to help people. You just might not get a thank you note at the end of the day like you would send a doctor. So, because you're solving problems behind the scenes. I was also quite a nerd growing up. I really liked, reading books like Harry Potter. I got involved in a lot of online communities, such as the Nerd Fighters group. They're a famous YouTube sensation. I also did a lot of sports and played instruments through high school. I started on trumpet and then switched to euphonium, which is like a mini tuba. If you learn trumpet, you can learn euphonium. You just have to switch from treble clef to bass clef. And I was really involved in like team activities. I was on the swim team and water polo, and which is in Michigan, water polo is not as common as it is out here in California. But I think through those, I learned like discipline and teamwork, and I also got a chance to be a captain. So I got some leadership skills there. And I think that really helped shape like how I look at the world and how I work with my peers. So let's see, since college, so I did swimming, water polo up through college, and then in graduate school, I couldn't really do, organized sports anymore. So I had a chance to develop some new hobbies. So I really got into things like rock climbing and started organizing a lot of camping trips, because out in California, there's like tons of places you can go explore. And then at one point, Stanford has this ballroom dancing group that's really popular. So I learned how to do some waltz and swing. Those were the main ones, and really got into that community. And then more recently, just this last year, actually, so I met my husband about 3 years ago, and we actually ended up getting married in the middle of the pandemic. We were engaged and had the wedding date, and then the pandemic happened, and well, we decided we loved each other enough to go through with it anyway, and we're quite happy now. And yeah, so that's all going on behind the scenes while I was doing engineering. Yeah, and I helped think. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to mention, when I was a kid, the other thing I really liked to do was like arts and crafts. So I was very artistic. I really liked drawing pictures and like figuring out, like I was really into like bead animals, like making little animals with like strings and beads and things like that. And I really got into knitting. And I think that type of like motor skill and like figuring out how to do these types of things really helped me get the like spatial awareness and like understanding that brain that helps me with the engineering I do. So what kind of engineering do I do? Next slide, please. So I guess here's some early highlights from when I was starting from like before high school up through early grad school. Since I was from a big family, I usually had siblings around being like, hey, Karen, what are you up to? So one of my favorite memories is when I was in high school, we had a really big snow in Michigan, and the snow was like perfectly sticky for like making snowballs and snowmen. I decided one day, like, we're going to build an igloo. And I thought that was like kind of my first engineering feat, is we managed to actually build one all the way to the top with the dome, which I always found kind of challenging. But I had like this huge like army of helpers, which were like my younger siblings, that were really determined to get this thing done. And we finished it in a day. And my boyfriend at the time, he was 6 foot, so he helped us finish the top because none of us could reach it. And yeah, I think I actually ended up using that on my college essays when I was applying to college, was like this spark of like, I had this idea and I organized a team and we got it done and we actually built something. Like, that was really cool. Another big STEM moment for me early on was when I went to the Notre Dame engineering camp. Basically, the idea was to take students who were interested in math and science and had some sort of interest in engineering, and they gave us exposure to different departments and different types of engineering and gave us small activities to try to learn what it was like. So we built bridges out of like Legos and Connects. And a big moment for me was when they pulled out these things called breadboards, which is for making electronics. You plug in electric components into this board and you can apply a battery and like get things to move or lights to turn on. And I had never seen this before. I had never learned about it in school. And I was like, what is this puzzle? And I like sat there and tried to figure it out. Well, after other people had like given up or finished because other people had seen it from their schools. Anyway, so I think that was like my first moment where I was like, how do electronics work? Why don't I understand this? I like physics. I like chemistry. Why don't I understand this? So it kept sparking curiosity. And then throughout college, I ended up picking electrical engineering, not because I thought I was good at it. It was actually the topic I knew the least. And I just wanted to understand. I was like, well, and so I was like, I'm going to invest the next 4 years in figuring out how this stuff works. And through that, I got to do all these other cool projects and learn that electrical engineering is actually quite a diverse field. It's not just building circuits or programming a computer, but you can also build small objects to create sensors in the world around you. And so one of the internships I did at Michigan, I got to 3D print a structure to turn a sensor that a graduate student had made into a touch sensor. So it could sense forces being pressed on it. So like if a bug walked across this thing, this sensor would know. And then, so that got me really into this field called microelectromechanical systems. So basically little sensors, like the ones in your phone that can detect when the screen's tilted, or are like a compass to figure out which way is north magnetically. And I always find that stuff really interesting. How do you convert the world around you into electrical data that we can understand in a computer and do stuff with? So sensors are really important. So I decided to pursue that for my PhD. I was like, I want to do something related to sensors. So I went to Stanford, and my first project was making stuff out of a semiconductor known as silicon carbide, which is like a really tough version of electrical material. And this is kind of this picture's of the first time I had a good result. I was trying to etch deep holes into this material that's really tough. And we were spending months and months on it, and we couldn't get anywhere. And then one day it worked. We tried the right combination of things in our experiment. And I was like, oh my gosh, it worked. So this was at like 11 at night. My friend took a picture, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's a future in this. So that was really exciting. And as you can see, this is my name in that silicon carbide piece I had put on the material. And I don't know if you can tell that scale bar, but it's about 84 micrometers, which is, so a micrometer is 1/1000th of a millimeter, and a millimeter is 1/1000th of a meter. So as a reference, my name written there is about the same size as the thickness of a human hair. So really tiny. There's a lot of really cool tiny stuff that you can do below what we can see with the naked eye. So I guess that kind of was the start of my graduate career. And then over time, I figured out like more useful things I could do, which takes me to the next slide. Yeah, all right, this is almost done. So I figured out that I was working I joined a group that makes tough electronics for outer space. So first I had worked with silicon carbide, and then I worked with another material called gallium nitride. And we ended up making this sensor that can detect magnetic fields that are really, really small fields, so that you could use it as a compass in outer space. And we even got to analyze the sensor for its, like, what things that were non-ideal. So for example, in this video, we took a heat map of the device and figured out what part of the electronics were failing because of hot spots in the material. Then we did take some of these sensors and we put them on electronics boards, similar to that first one that I made in high school, but a bit more complicated. And we actually put it on this cube satellite. So it's like a small miniaturized space instrument, like a satellite. And then we actually launched it on a rocket to try and measure magnetic fields during the rocket ride. So that was a pretty cool PhD project, I'd say, getting to work on all these different aspects of electrical engineering. And then nowadays, final slide for me. Sorry, I know I feel like I've taken up a lot of time, but so nowadays I work at a government lab and work with similar materials that are tough electronics, but now we're using them for energy efficient applications. So the idea is that we're taking a conducting piece of either silicon carbide or gallium nitride while it's turned off. And instead of using an electrical signal to turn it on, we are using light. So the idea is that the light will hit the material, and it'll generate electrons, and we can use those electrons to conduct a current. And this scenario can work more efficiently in certain applications for like communicating in space, or since we're in the Department of Energy, we're looking at it for efficiency in power electronics. And one of my coworkers, he actually made one of these. It's called a photoconductive switch. We use light to turn this high power electronic high voltage on and off. And yeah, one of my colleagues, this is his picture. He actually made one of these out of diamond. So diamond is also a semiconductor. It's not just jewelry. Yeah, so it's been pretty exciting. I've got to learn a lot and take things I learned in one scenario and apply them differently in a new scenario. And that's my journey. So thanks for listening.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing your personal journey and how you got it there. And we've worked together for a couple years, and there are a lot of pieces that I didn't know. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so next we're gonna jump to our next speaker, and you'll have a chance to ask questions after. Let me go ahead and share his first slide. Okay, can you see that? All right, Perfect. So, our next speaker is Dr. Rey Martin. He is a second generation Latino and the first in his family to attend a university. Rey earned an undergraduate degree in biochemistry from UCLA and a graduate degree in chemical engineering at Northwestern University. He worked at DuPont as a fermentation engineer, making enzymes that are used in the detergents that we use every day. And in his current role, Rey is a process development scientist seeking to improve the production of biomedicines as a part of the biopharmaceutical company Amgen. So, with that, thank you so much for joining us, Rey, and feel free to go ahead and start your presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Angela and Jessica, for inviting me. I'm really excited to share with you all a little bit about my journey. So on this first slide, I have just highlighted my professional journey, and it looks very linear. It looks very clean, very clear. But the reality is underlying all of this, similar to what Karen had shown, is there's a jumbled mess of what's really happening in terms of research journey and my personal life. So. But kind of highlighting what Jessica touched upon, I was born in 1990 and pretty much born and raised in California in the Los Angeles area. My high school was near the LA area, and I was part of the magnet program the last 2.5 years. I'll go touch upon that a little bit later. But when I was in high school, my sister was actually struggling to graduate. At that time, my parents both didn't really have a formal education. My mom actually dropped out of this same high school I went to, and my brother was just 2 years behind me. So whatever decisions I made, I knew would impact him at the very least. So, graduating high school was actually a big deal for me. And I know for many of you, it will be as well. And I really applaud your guys' efforts. And I hope my journey helps kind of set up some sort of precedent for what it could be achieved thereafter, because after high school there's still so much more to do. So luckily ended up in UCLA, where I did my work in biochemistry, and that was a bit of a struggle. I'll go into that a little bit more later. But if you notice, I made this switch from biochemistry to chemical engineering, and that was very purposeful. So kind of like how Karen had outlined a lot of the wonderful things that you can do in electrical engineering, and it's so diverse. I also like how engineering can be used to solve a variety of different problems. And so I found that if I wanted to transition into industry later, biochemistry would kind of pigeonhole me more on the science side, which is great and really important. But I wanted to also open my opportunities. So I thought engineering would be a great fit. So I actually had to transition into a much more heavy math, physics-based engineering program, I thought, in order to increase my chances thereafter. So I did a PhD in chemical and biological engineering at Northwestern, and that was a switch because I was moving to Chicago. But ultimately, I came back to California as part of DuPont, and there I was working at a site in Palo Alto, so in the Silicon Valley, so in San Francisco. So I was very happy to be back in California. And then recently I moved to Thousand Oaks area, which is near LA area again, as part of Amgen as a scientist. And so you can see, I can now play this role of either engineer or scientist because of my previous background. And that's what I really liked about this. So on the next slide, I'll go through a little bit more about my research journey, and it looks a little bit more messy here. That's on purpose because that wasn't as clean as my educational journey. And up until high school, I actually had no research experience. Like many of you, maybe I hadn't even heard of research. I had only seen it on maybe like the news, and you guys have probably seen people holding pipettes on the news, especially because COVID is the talk of the town right now. And so you see it a lot, but I had no experience. So at UCLA, I found that a lot of scholarships, a lot of summer research or summer programs and stuff emphasize research, and that's actually how I got my start. So I ended up applying for a lab position in Sabihah Merchant's laboratory in the biochemistry department. And that was really wonderful. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I ended up learning a lot of the fundamentals of the science of how a cell works, what a nucleus does, what it holds, how DNA works. things like that, by studying a green algae known as Chlamydomonas reinhardti. I had no idea I was going to go to UCLA to look at algae, the same thing that grows in your tub if you're not clean enough, or just in the ocean and stuff. And so, but the fundamentals that I learned there really set the stage for me to kind of learn and grow as a scientist thereafter. So at Northwestern, I ended up working on something called cell-free protein synthesis. Actually, Jessica Perez and I were both in the same lab in Mike Jewett's lab there. And by studying cell-free protein synthesis, what I was trying to do is essentially replicate the same thing that happens inside of a cell, but instead doing all that inside of a test tube. And that gives us more engineering controls to make things that you could never imagine making inside of a living cell. And I ended up publishing there. So that's something I got some experience for. Ended up creating a system that very efficiently added into proteins things that don't normally exist in nature. And that really opens up the Pandora's box to new types of possibilities and engineering items that could be produced in the future. So that was really cool and exciting. But I then transitioned into industry after. I decided that academia, so being a professor, wasn't necessarily the right step for me. And in DuPont, I have a video here kind of showing what it's like working as a fermentation engineer. So there you have a big engine sitting on top of 100,000 liter fermentation that's intended to spin this turbine that's inside this 100,000 liter culture to deliver oxygen to cells, producing enzymes that are useful for us. So these enzymes could be used to could be proteases that are chewing up the protein that are left over on our dishes before we put them into the dishwasher, for example. And so that was something really cool where I was able to leverage a lot of the math, physics, science that I learned before and apply it to a real world setting. So that was really cool. And then I transitioned and then I moved over to Amgen. You'll see on the next slide, for personal reasons, because I got married and stuff. But at Amgen now, what I'm doing is understanding how antibodies work. And this is something that's part of our natural defense mechanism as human beings to fight off diseases and parasites and things. And so now my work involves how to develop these antibodies, these therapies to treat some of the most debilitating diseases like cancer, and develop these drugs in an efficacious way to provide to patients. So that's been very rewarding and fulfilling in a different way than the work that I had done at DuPont was. So that's a bit about my research journey. And then behind the scenes, so on the next slide, you'll see a little bit more about my personal journey. So as I highlighted, when I was born, I was kind of born and raised in the Los Angeles area. Both of my parents came here from Mexico, actually. And my dad jumped the border when he was in his teens. My mom was snuck in when she was 3 years old. And so that's kind of the start that I had. So, and even when I went to Narbonne, I feel like I got put in the performing arts small group. So I wasn't even in the magnet program when I started high school. And so I was dancing and doing all these things, not knowing that I wasn't in magnet classes that would help prepare me for the future, just because I didn't know. And one of the things that ended up happening was I got placed into magnet after they realized, wow, this kid actually does pretty well in his science classes. He probably shouldn't be dancing. He should probably be studying a little bit more. And that's one of the first times I learned I had to be an advocate for myself and realize, I need to be pushed to do more challenging things and things that, I can do well. I just need to believe in myself and ask for them at times. So that was really cool. But because I kind of felt I had this late start, I actually never took physics in high school and before that. So at UCLA, I was taking physics for the first time with people that had taken years of it. So I had to really study. That was probably the hardest time for me. But what I wanted to emphasize for you guys is it doesn't have to be the same way for you guys. So you have these challenging classes in middle school and high school, asked to be in the hardest physics classes and high school classes, because a lot of those challenging problems that you will encounter again in undergrad and grad school. And so the more time you have to think about these challenging problems, I guarantee you, the better well equipped you will be to solve them later on in your lives. And so, Northwestern for me at least was challenging because I was away from family now. So I was in Siberia. So this is like a very cold Chicago. I experienced like 3 or 4 polar vortexes while I was there. The cold was a challenge. Being away from family was a challenge, which is why I really wanted to go back to California. So at DuPont, I was now about 350 miles away from family. Because my family was in LA, I was in San Francisco, but that didn't matter. I still drove up and down the 5 freeway, which is outlined in pink there, about every other week. It ends up equating to, over the course of 2 years, about 15% of the distance between Earth and the moon. So it was a lot of driving, basically. But I didn't care. I was finally close to home, and I was actually organizing the wedding with Becky, my wife, at the time. And once we got married, I realized this long distance thing is going to be hard. So I actually found a job at Amgen, which is in Thousand Oaks. So now we're actually able to live together, live in the same apartment. So that was really important to us. And that's why I prioritized that over the work that I was doing at DuPont. And I'm very happy now working at Amgen. It's been great, especially I transitioned right before COVID. So now working from home is actually very much a privilege for me, at least. I know a lot of my family that doesn't necessarily have advanced degrees don't have that luxury. And that's something, that's a big perk that can happen during times of stress. If you guys get advanced degrees, these are the types of things that you also get that aren't necessarily highlighted when making those decisions. So I just wanted to highlight that for you guys. And I'd be happy to take any questions now that I shared a little bit more about myself with you.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Ray. And again, if you do have questions, please use that Q&A feature to enter your questions, and I'll relay those to the speakers. We did have some questions come in beforehand. One of them, both of you kind of mentioned that there were different experiences, either an internship or a class or something that helped you figure out what you wanted to do in the future. But oftentimes, it's hard for students to even know what those opportunities are. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you were able to find out about those opportunities. Was it a mentor? Was it by looking in certain places? What sort of advice would you give students to try to look for more of those opportunities, maybe where they're at now in middle school, high school? And that could be to either one of you.
I can go first. So at least in middle school, I found it maybe, talking to teachers, that's always very helpful. I had a history teacher that really set me up for success. He really challenged me to think about what to do after high school. I hadn't given it much thought. And then in high school, what was really nice is there was actually a college center. So I would spend my lunches in the college center looking at scholarships, looking at colleges, talking to the program director there. And so if you guys have one of those, please seek that out. And then when you're in college, there's like, especially if you're a minority, there's some sort of office that kind of works to help make sure that minorities at the school learn about different programs and stuff. I highly encourage going to those offices whenever you can and just asking questions to, figuring out who to talk to and then just asking all the questions you have.
Yeah, that's great. Let's see, for me, I think I feel pretty lucky. Both my parents are science related. My dad's a professor, my mom's a doctor. So early on, I was lucky that I had the encouragement from home to be like, look for internships, like you should find a lab and things like that. But it took me a while to like understand why they were saying those things. So I think my first one opportunity, I had great teachers in school, and one of the teachers gave extra credit if you participated in the science fair, and this class was really hard. So I did the science fair so that I could try to keep my grades up. And turns out the judges at the science fair also worked at like companies doing engineering in the area, either companies or their professors. And so the judges at the fair are a great place, a great way to like, you can ask them, like, do you have internships in your lab? I'm interested in science. How could I learn more about it? And things like that. So that's definitely a piece of advice I would give. I think if you start looking through colleges, a lot of colleges have like summer programs. And I think, I can't remember how I found out about the Notre Dame one. I think I might have been Googling it, or I had an older brother who looked into it. He didn't get in, so I applied and then I got in. So it was like a competition thing, I guess, between me and my brother at that point. But yeah, I know Stanford has one, Notre Dame has one, and a lot of these places also have financial aid. Like the ticket price might seem really high, but they do definitely prioritize helping students get a chance to go, even if the finances are an issue. That happened for me at Notre Dame, actually, because I'm from a big family, and my sister was going through chemotherapy. We actually got financial aid from my engineering camp. So, I think later on in college, it's a bit easier. You got to not be scared to talk to the professors in your classes. And I definitely was scared of my professors. It's very intimidating to be on campus surrounded by all these really bright peers, and then there's a professor who seems to know everything at the front of the room. But professors like talking to students. It doesn't seem like that at first, but they really do. Go to their office hours. And a lot of schools have undergraduate internship programs to do research. A lot of it's funded by government funding, like the NSF, the National Science Foundation. And so there's opportunities there. So you can, if you go to class and are participating and asking good questions, even dumb questions, professors just love questions. You can build a relationship with the professor and then start asking them like, hey, if I'm interested in science, what can I do here? And they might help. Maybe they'll have an opening in their group, or they'll point you to someone else who is looking for a student. Also, career fairs were a big thing for me. I got my first internship just going to career fairs, and it was pretty intimidating at first, but I just kept trying and started learning the pattern. Like, what are they looking for? What's good on a resume? And the Career Center was also really, I actually brought my resume to the Career Center and they tore it to pieces. They like changed everything. And I think learning to take feedback like that was I was very proud of like my skills. So it took a lot of work personal work to like accept that there's room to grow. So, and edit and make things look better.
Yeah, no, those are awesome answers. And I like that each of you kind of have a different spin. It was like you could either talk to your teachers and counselors about different opportunities that might be coming up, taking advantage of some of those extracurricular activities to meet other people, and then just asking directly for feedback or asking questions as you have them to help develop that relationship with either your teacher, counselor, or future professor. So I think those are really great suggestions. One of the questions that did come up in the chat was, how did you get into college? So I'm sure part of that was in play, either talking to people, developing those relationships, but were there any other particular things specifically? Because both of the colleges that y'all went to were very competitive. So were there any things that you were doing in particular that you think made you stand out, or things that you talked about in your application that you maybe want to share with the students?
Yeah, I can go first. So the way in which I didn't know I was going to go to college. My sister was going to a community college by the time I was graduating high school. I thought I was going to do that, but because someone had said, "Oh, you can apply to 4 UCs for free because you're a California resident, you should at least do that." So then I chose 4, UCLA being one of them, and luckily I got in. But the reality is, I had a really poor SAT score. And because I didn't know I needed to prepare for that to go to college, I just took it because I knew I needed to. I thought I did. But the essays, Karen highlighted the power of an essay and how it can really come from anywhere, building an igloo. But in my case, I think I just used some of the sports I was doing at the time, like cross country, making an analogy how, it's very hard running on that 5th mile, and equating that to kind of how, my life had been at times very much a struggle, but you just got to keep going, even if you just walk it, but as much as you can, you try and run, and you just keep moving forward. I think that's something I kept emphasizing on the essays. I think perhaps that drive shine through the essays. And I think that's why UCLA made a decision to take what I always envision as a risk. My wife tries to tell me, no, they knew you were good for it. But I felt like there was no, I had to work really hard. I can't imagine that they knew. I don't know. But I got in. Once I did, I just kept running. I didn't because I don't want to pass up the opportunity by thinking negative thoughts, if that makes sense.
So yeah, I guess for me, I always kind of knew I was going to go to college because that was kind of the family expectation. And I was lucky to be in that kind of environment. Didn't always know why college was important, but it was kind of like, go to college and you'll get a good job. I'm like, getting a job sounds good, so I'll do that. Yeah. I think so. Yeah, my high school really was geared, like we had a good counseling center that was really geared towards getting us thinking about college. Like sophomore year, sat down with my counselor and she was like, where do you want to go to college? I was like, so I was from Ann Arbor. So I was like, Michigan sounds good. Everyone goes there. And I guess from there we started talking about, she had this big packet I had to fill out of like extracurriculars I've done and stuff, which I mostly did those out of interest. I didn't do them just to get into college. I did them because I liked those things. Like I did music because I liked being part of a group and like what we could create together. And I liked sports. And also my parents had this rule that we always had to be doing a sport for like health. And so you could either do swimming or you could do the sport you wanted. So that's kind of how I ended up doing swimming and water polo. And they look for those things in colleges. They like to see that you're not just a student getting good grades. They want to see that you're a well-rounded individual. And you don't have to be good at everything. Most places are looking for a student that's trying hard in school, shows improvement. If you can't necessarily, like if they see your grades improve over time, that's a really big sign for schools. And they also like to see that you're passionate about something. So I guess, and yeah, English teachers are a helpful resource for writing your college essays because they're kind of your first intro into how to write and express yourself in a way that people will be engaged in reading it. So like my junior year English teacher, like one of our assignments was write a college essay, even though we weren't applying till the fall. He made us do that. So I guess I was lucky that there were a lot of these checks in place at my school. So if also I didn't really, a lot of my peers were like taking prep courses for the standardized tests like SAT, ACT. I didn't want to take a class. I thought that was a really boring way to spend time outside of school. But I did study on my own. I would get a book from the library, or my mom bought me a ACT prep book for Christmas, and I'd go through the examples. And I struggled with the English section. Like math was a bit more intuitive for me. So I really worked on like my vocabulary and writing and all those, like, what are they? This is to that, this is to that thing. Analogies. Yeah. We had to do analogies when I was studying for the SAT. So, and I remember doing enough to get a good enough score so that I wouldn't have to take it again. So like I didn't aim for perfect. I aimed for good enough. Like, what can I do to get into the local college? And then, and then Caltech in particular, I actually got, like, that was, of all the schools I applied, that was kind of like the reach school. Like, oh, it'd be like amazing if I got in there. It's a land of science and nerds. That would be cool. I didn't expect to get in. And I actually got deferred at first. So they sent me a small letter in like December that was like, hey, we haven't decided to reject you, but we haven't accepted you. We're going to look at you again with the rest of the pool. So apply early to schools if you can, because you might get a second chance. But some schools are tricky. Like Stanford, if you apply early, you can't apply early anywhere else. So I don't know. I didn't want to take that risk. I wanted to get in somewhere early. So look early. That's a good way to get into colleges. Anyway, so when I got the deferral letter from Caltech, I actually went back and they gave me an envelope and they were like, if you want to add anything to your application, I'm like, I gave you everything. What else do you want? So I actually ended up doing a second science fair project and wrote up the report and gave them the report I wrote for that science fair project. And I got another recommendation letter from my physics teacher at the time. And I think that showed them that I was interested in science, like not just to get good grades, but I was also interested in science, which is unique for a school like Caltech. They want people who are passionate about the subject, regardless of what their grades are. So that's I remember those were key things for my journey to college. So.
Yeah, thank you. And I think what's really nice about what both of you said is that, I mean, it's obviously the things you think about, like taking the relevant courses, trying your hardest to get, your good grades, your SAT scores, etc. But it seems that schools are also looking at that holistically. And so ensuring that you talk about what your strengths are and what you're passionate about, because ultimately that's what sounds like it helped both of you is really being authentic in yourself and using your own identity and interests as a strength when you're applying to these things through your essay and all the other components of the college application. So that was great. We have a lot of other questions, but we're almost at time, so we might have time for just one or two. I think we haven't talked too much about the work that you do now. And so one of the questions was, do you enjoy what you're doing now? And if so, what is that? And if not, do you wish you kind of took another path or did something different? So maybe each of you can speak to that.
Yeah, so at Amgen, which is where it's been a little bit of a whirlwind because of COVID. I've been working from home, so I'm not doing the role as much as I would have normally been doing if I was still on site. So a lot of the work that I do is at home, writing reports, reading them, and understanding, what the job is that I need to do and prepare for when I go to lab. So when I go to lab, it's like 1 or 2 times a week now. And there I just run experiments one after another. So the more prep I do at home, the more efficient I am at work. And working for Amgen, I love it. It's nice that we're in a pandemic. It's not nice that we're in a pandemic, but working for a science company during a pandemic, it just makes sense. They take care of their employees. They understand that this virus is going to take a long time to combat, and they're not willing to put their workers at risk. So and they understand the risks. That's been really, really great. And I've just been very fortunate because of that. But yeah, at times my work can be a bit tedious because I'm constantly reading, writing. That's not something that I like to do. I really do enjoy being at the bench because it's kind of fun running experiments, and you always get this bit of excitement not knowing if it's going to turn out well, even though you do all the work. And then when it doesn't, you get asked the questions, well, why didn't it? Is there something else I can do? And you talk with others to try and ask the right questions as to modifications you can make. So it's always a challenge, and that's what makes it exciting. It's not a repetitive kind of, you're hitting the same nail with the same hammer again and again. It's not that. It's exciting. You never know what's going to happen. But as you build that confidence as a scientist and in yourself to do good work, you're never afraid to tackle the next challenge. And that's the most important thing that you can do, is build your confidence doing the science, understanding the science to get to that point. And that's something you guys will all do over the course of your career.
Yeah, I guess for me, I do enjoy what I do right now. Yeah, day to day, it's different. Some days I work from home and look at data that I gathered from an experiment. And some days I'm in the lab setting up experiments. The government lab lets us go in during COVID, but we have to be careful and be safe and all that. Wear masks and wash our hands, stay away from people. Yeah, someone was asked, I guess part of the question was would you have gone down a different path? Are you happy with the path you've chosen? I think I am. And over time, I guess early on I was worried, what if I picked the wrong thing? But what I've learned is, since science and engineering is so connected in our world, there are plenty of ways to change your path. You can do it later. So I'm actually currently applying to, since I'm a postdoc, it means it's a temporary position. So I could either stay at this lab or I can look elsewhere. And I'm actually looking at both right now, trying to figure out what would be my path if I stayed here versus I'm applying to other jobs at the moment too. Mostly in teaching, because I realize I like interacting with students. Yeah, and there's even if the field you're in, the science you picked there's ways to pivot. You can work with people that are doing things you're interested in and then learn from them. Some people go back to school and get another degree. There's tons of ways to pivot or like use your skills and apply it to a new problem. Because a lot of our skills can be converted to new things. Like someone at the lab I work at, she started out in biostatistics and now works on laser statistics. So she had the statistics skill and she just changed her interest. So,
And I guess we do have time for maybe one more, and maybe more from I guess like a fun question. So outside of work, and you talked a little bit about your hobbies, what are some of the things that you're doing now to have a little bit of balance with work? Because I'm sure working from home, it might be hard to turn off going to work because work's right there. So how do you balance that? And are there different hobbies that you do for fun?
Yeah, so my hobby is right here. So she's sleeping on the couch. This is my dog. So at the start of COVID, we adopted her, and I've always wanted a dog ever since I was pretty much in undergrad. And so now I've gotten the chance to kind of train her, just work with her, and working from home, I get that flexibility to dedicate more time that I wanted, and just being able to have something to take care of really allows me to kind of think differently. It's not just about what I want now. It's what does my dog want? What is she thinking and stuff? It really allows me to kind of change my perspective, which is something that you'll find during your career. It's really critical to do. Anything to kind of change your perspective on an issue allows you to find a solution maybe that much more efficiently, because if you just look at it from one direction all the time, you may not get there as fast as you want. So yeah, having a dog, I think, has been really a great thing for me. At least that's something I've always wanted.
yeah. Oh, it's a cute dog. Yeah. I think for me, my free time is spent mostly decompressing and recovering. So my husband and I would go on walks to enjoy the neighborhood. Everyone goes walking now during COVID. We bought 2 video game consoles. So we have a PS4 and a Nintendo Switch. And I haven't been much of a video game person, but this is like recent. Like we got Christmas money and we spent it on this stuff. And it's been really fun. So that might sound kind of lame. And we watch a lot of TV. My sister gave me her Disney Plus password. So I finally finished The Mandalorian. So I'm not going to say I have like these super nice aspiring hobbies at the moment. I'm just trying to get by. We also cook. We started cooking more and trying new recipes. My husband's vegetarian and I eat meat, so I'm trying to learn how to cook more vegetarian meals that taste good. So I got a new cookbook for Christmas, so I'm trying things like that. Long term, I would like to travel again. We're starting to think about kind of vacations we'll take when it's safer to travel, and what friends we want to go see. Yeah. It's okay to have fun. You don't have to work all the time, and I would go crazy if I worked all the time. So, yeah.
Balance is very essential, especially at this time. Yes. So thank you. We're very close to the hour, so we're going to go ahead and conclude. But I want to thank our speakers so much for being able to come here today and talk with students and share your experiences, because that's really invaluable. So thank you so much to the speakers. Thank you very much to the attendees who were able to come by. We will be posting the recording on that website that I sent out earlier. I'll send it out again right now. And also check that out if you want to see our upcoming seminars in this next year. So with that, thank you, everyone, and
thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Of course.